Thank you for joining us for our Cash for College Navigating Financial Aid for Immigrant Families webinar. We've already kind of talked a lot about this topic throughout our webinars earlier in the year, but we're really going to be diving deep into the content today. So excited about that. My name's May Whiting, and I am the Data and Research Manager at Alabama Possible. Just want to take a quick moment to recognize all of our sponsors who are supporting trainings like this. And then we also want to give a big shout out to our partners who are contributing in all kinds of ways to the Alabama Goes to College campaign. So a few housekeeping notes before we get started. Please keep your microphones on mute at all times to avoid feedback during the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and it will be posted to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Alabama Possible. And then throughout today's webinar, you are able to submit your questions by using the Zoom chat feature. When doing so, please make sure that you're clicking to everyone so that everyone is able to see your question or comment, and that'll just help us eliminate any duplicate questions. But we'll be holding on to all of those questions throughout the session, and then we'll address them towards the end during our Q&A section of the webinar. We will have some poll questions throughout today's webinar, so we encourage everyone to respond to those so that we can get your real-time feedback. But for high school educators who want professional development credit, you will need to respond to those questions in order to be eligible for PD. And I wanted to highlight just a few things about PD specifically. As a reminder, you need to register for the webinar in Zoom in order to be able to log in. So all of you are here have done that, but we want to make sure that you are registering with your own Zoom account. So don't borrow someone else's Zoom account and then don't just use someone else's Zoom link to access the webinar, because the way that we track attendance is by seeing whose Zoom account has logged in today. So you'll want to use your own. And then professional development eligibility is based on the duration of the webinar that you attend. So you have to attend most of the webinar. And then it also depends on your participation in our poll questions. So you will need to stay all the way to the end to answer those to be eligible. And then after all of that, you will need to register in PowerSchool to claim your PD if you are eligible. So there is that two-step process. You register in Zoom so that we know you're here, and then you register in PowerSchool so that the State Department of Education knows that you want PD credit. So I hope that that clears up any confusion. If you have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, but both of those registration processes should be fairly quick. So hopefully it's not taking up too much of your time. All right, so if you're on social media, you can find us at AL Goes to College. We're on a bunch of different platforms. And as we're having conversations around financial aid, we encourage you to use hashtags like hashtag FAFSA, hashtag Cash for College, and hashtag PellYes. High schools can still register for the 2022-23 Alabama Goes to College campaign. You can do that at the link seen on the screen. If you haven't yet registered, you won't be eligible for our monetary awards, but you can still register in order to access all of the benefits of the campaign, like professional development trainings and such. So here are the overview of the campaign components. Our statewide campaign is comprised of 3 different initiatives, and the one that we're going to focus on today is Cash for College. So its main goal is really to build awareness around financial aid and oftentimes we're talking about the FAFSA specifically. But as you can see in our conversation today, we're also really stressing that there are other financial aid opportunities beyond the FAFSA, and that'll be really important for the population that we're talking about today. So we're going to start off with a quick poll question. I'm going to launch that now. So you should see that pop up on your screen. So if you work with immigrant students, who's the main person supporting their college and career planning? So about 50% of you are responding counselor, but then we also do have career coaches, Yale teachers, and then community-based organization staff who are assisting these students. But it's predominantly counselors. So thank you all for responding to that. All right, so here is today's agenda. So we're going to start by reviewing some key terms and data, and then we'll look at some timely updates on relevant federal policy. After that, we'll describe federal aid eligibility based on citizenship status. We'll also investigate some complicated FAFSA scenarios. And then we'll review aid options for students who cannot complete the FAFSA or who are not eligible for federal aid. And then we'll round it out by exploring some strategies and some tools for working with immigrant families. And I want to preface all of this by saying that this is a fairly complicated topic. We are always doing our best to consult with federal student aid as well as other organizations that have a lot of expertise around these issues. So if you have any question that we're not able to answer today, we are happy to both do some research or connect you with someone who can assist you further. So just keep that in mind. All right, so I'm now going to turn it over to Michaela to discuss some key terms and data.
Hello, everyone. My name is Micaela Orr, and I work with HICA, the Hispanic Interest Coalition of Alabama. I'm a program manager there, and I supervise our Empowering Communities program, which houses our education, workforce development, and civic engagement work. And so we do a lot of career coaching for high school students, which is why I'm here today on this webinar. I've been with HICA for about 3 years and 1 year in my current role. But I have been a frequent guest on these webinars this school year, and that is also because I'm an intern with Alabama Possible. So I'm currently getting my master's, and I am working with this wonderful team. And so before we get into these key terms and data, just to preface this conversation, and to be transparent with what I know about this topic, I am not an immigration expert or policy expert. I am just like y'all, someone who has had to really learn every detail that impacts students, right? So as May mentioned, if we cannot answer your question today, please let us know, and we will try to find an answer for you. So we'll go ahead and get started. So some of the key terms you're going to hear us talk about today are here on the screen. And before we jump into these, I always like to kind of touch on this one word, which is illegal. You know, I think for a long time, we would often say things like they're illegal or illegal immigrants or they're here illegally. And we've really tried to move away from that. The term illegal kind of dehumanizes the experiences of undocumented individuals. And so in our roles in building trust with students and families, we want to make sure that we're using terms that let people know that we're being supportive of them. So always like to start with that. But some of the other terms that you'll hear are immigrant, and that refers to people residing in the United States who were not US citizens at birth. Again, we have undocumented individual. And this is a person who entered the US legally and their immigration status has expired, or they entered the US without authorization. Let's see. So then we have DACA recipient, and that is a person who's been granted protection under deferred action for childhood arrivals. We will talk specifically about this here shortly, so I'll be happy to elaborate more on that. And then you might hear us say dreamer, and that is a documented, so DACA and documented put together, or undocumented youth, and persons who arrived as children or youth to the United States and have not been able to find a path to naturalization. So we can go to the next one. So we also wanted to share a little bit of data about the immigrants that are actually here in Alabama. So according to the American Community Survey, which is a survey done by the Census Bureau every year, this is data from 2021, about 3.5% of Alabamian residents are foreign born, and that just means that they were born outside of the US. And so as someone who did not grow up in Alabama, when I first came here, I was really surprised to see how many different groups of immigrants that are here in the state. And some of those are from Mexico. That is definitely the largest group here in Alabama. But in the past 10 years, we've also seen a huge influx of immigrants from Central America. So that is going to be countries like El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala. We also have a large Korean population here, folks from China. We also have a lot of people from Germany. And of course, that has to do with the increase in auto manufacturing in the States. And then we also have a lot of people from India. So again, just wanted to highlight all the different groups that are here. I think we can definitely get into the habit of stereotyping what immigrants actually look like. So I think this is a great way to kind of see that, you know, there's so many different groups here in Alabama. And so of the immigrants that are here in the state, over 28,000 immigrants are students, and that is ages 3 and older that are currently enrolled in pre-K through college. And approximately a little over 5,000 are in high school right now. So the one thing that this doesn't really highlight is the amount of second generation students that you may have in your school. And those are families that their parents may have immigrated here, and this might be they might be the first person in their family to go to college. So that in and of itself kind of adds an extra layer to this conversation. Okay, so we're going to talk now about some federal policies, and you know, one of the questions I hear often from educators is, how can families become documented? And that is definitely a really tricky question. There has not been any significant policy changes to our immigration system in a really long time. We have seen that there are certain humanitarian visas that are now available. For example, VAWA, which is Violence Against Women, the Violence Against Women Act, or VOCA, the Victims of Crime Act, and certain people are eligible for these types of humanitarian visas. But since then, and that happened in the early 90s, but since then, the only real federal policy was DACA. Again, I'm going to talk about that here in just a few minutes. But yeah, so just to kind of give you all a little bit of context on how families can become documented at this point in time. But now we're going to cover some of these federal policies that actually directly affect students and their path after high school. And these really impact the financial aid side of things. So the first one we're going to talk about is the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996. And so what this does is it basically prohibits undocumented students from obtaining in-state tuition. And now about 21 states and DC have passed laws that actually allow for students to have in-state tuition. But unfortunately, Alabama is not one of these states. Now, we have heard of some schools in the state who have allowed documented or DACA recipient students to have in-state tuition. For example, Jacksonville State University, they have a specific waiver that a DACA recipient can fill out, and then they can get in-state tuition. Right now, we are at HICA, we're trying to compile a list of these schools that allow for in-state tuition and kind of like what the process is, because it can be very confusing. We've also heard of some schools charging DACA recipients international rates. So again, it can be very confusing for students and families. So that is something that we are going to be working on in the next year come January. So you can go to the next slide. So the next policy is the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act of 1996. And so this bars the provision of state and local public benefits, including post-secondary benefits for non-qualified aliens. So what does that mean? Basically, this disqualifies undocumented students from accessing federal aid, in-state tuition, and other public benefits. And so the other thing that this touches on is that it disqualifies undocumented immigrants from obtaining occupational licenses. And so in the United States, 1 in 4 jobs requires a license or credential. Now, I know in our work, we have seen, students who maybe want to go into certain fields that require licenses, and they feel defeated and discouraged. And so this is definitely one of the reasons why. I will say that there are some students who may be able to obtain a license or sort of credential because they have DACA or another type of visa that allows them an exemption. And that is considered a conditional permanent resident. And there's a whole list of different visas that could qualify someone for that exemption. Okay, so we are going to talk about DACA. And so again, this refers to deferred action for childhood arrivals. And so this was an executive order under the Obama administration in 2012. And it is for immigrant youth who came to the US as children. It provides temporary protection from deportation and work permits for 2 years, but they need to renew their DACA every 2 years in order to keep that. And so they had to prove that they were in the country before June 15th of 2007 and that they were 16 years old or younger at the time of entry. And so, excuse me, just a little update on DACA. You may have heard, but in the past 4 to 5 years, it has gone through so many hoops and challenges from different states. And so it has been for the past year at the 5th Circuit Court of Appeals in a lawsuit called Texas versus the United States. And on October 5th, the 5th Circuit Court of Appeals agreed with the plaintiff, which is Texas, that DACA was unlawful. Now, just about a month before that ruling came out on August 30th, the Biden administration published a federal rule that intended to formalize and protect the program. And so right now, after this October 5th ruling, it was sent back to the Texas court system, and they are currently reviewing the DACA case in light of this new Biden administration rule. So that is definitely a lot to digest, a lot of information. So what does this mean, right? So the students who currently have DACA, what is their situation right now? So as of this moment, current DACA recipients can continue to renew their cases, and it is very much encouraged that they continue to stay on top of their renewal for every 2 years. And the other part of this is that USCIS, which is the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services Office, they are not processing DACA requests for first-time applicants right now. So if you have a student who does not have DACA, they could technically send in their information, but the USCIS office is not approving any cases right now. So basically, it's just kind of in this limbo state. If you have it, you can continue to have it and continue to have the protection. But if you do not, then you're just kind of waiting. And so yeah, that is our update on policy.
Thank you so much. So just to reiterate, I know that's a lot of information to process, so thank you for explaining it. But depending on a student's immigration status, it really could be impacting not only where they can apply to college, but what kind of aid they can access. And so we're really going to get into federal aid eligibility and how that is impacting certain immigrant populations. So let's dive into that right now. I just want to kind of ground all of this in that federal student aid is responsible for managing the student financial assistance programs authorized under Title IV of the Higher Education Act of 1965. So this will include things like grants, work study, loan funds that are going to students attending college or career school. So when we talk about federal aid eligibility, we're talking about Title IV eligibility. And so you might hear in the news or in whatever space you might occupy that folks are advocating for Title IV aid to be expanded to include immigrant populations. And we certainly hope that it will be expanded for these students. So who is eligible for federal aid? To be fully eligible for federal financial aid, students, so we're talking about students here, students must either be a US citizen, US national, or eligible non-citizen. And we're going to define all of those terms today. And then they have to have a valid social security number, although there are some exceptions for students who are from the Republic of the Marshall Islands, the Federated States of Micronesia, and then the Republic of Palau. And then additionally, students have to have a high school diploma or GED certificate, or complete an approved homeschool education, or meet one of the ability to benefit alternatives. So to be eligible, a student must meet all of these requirements. In addition to being enrolled or accepted as a regular student in an eligible degree or certificate program. When they're in that program, they'll have to maintain satisfactory academic progress. That's going to be defined by whatever institution they're attending. And then the student will also need to sign certifying statements on the FAFSA. And this is mostly applicable to students who are already in college, but they're basically signing that that when they received federal student aid, they weren't in default on a federal student loan, they didn't owe any money on a federal student grant, and that they're always using their federal aid for educational purposes only. So all of these are going to apply to the student that is seeking aid. So when the student is completing a FAFSA, they'll get to the first section, which is student demographics. And in that section, it will ask the student about their citizenship status. So the student can respond one of three ways. They can say, yes, I am a US citizen or US national. No, but I am an eligible non-citizen. Or no, I am not a citizen or eligible non-citizen. And then depending on which option the student selects, their process for moving forward will differ. So if they select option one, indicating that they're a US citizen or US national, they'll just proceed forward with the application. If they select option two, that they're an eligible non-citizen, then they will need to provide their alien registration number, and we'll show you what that looks like in just a moment. And then if they select option three, that they're not a citizen and they're not an eligible non-citizen, then they can proceed forward. However, they're going to have very limited aid options. And really, we only recommend that students actually complete a FAFSA and select this option if they've already contacted the financial aid office of their college or university to see if they actually want the student to complete a FAFSA. So there might be an alternative way that the college or institution would like to understand the student's financial need. Some colleges will get the student to complete a FAFSA. Some might get the student to complete the CSS profile, or some might have a totally different form to figure out student need. So I always recommend before a student spends so much time on this application that they're actually getting in touch with the financial aid office of their college to see what that college actually recommends. So to define each of these terms as it relates to the three options, US citizens are persons who are born in the 50 states, the District of Columbia, and in most cases, Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, Guam, and the Northern Mariana Islands. And then it will also include most persons who are born abroad to parents or a parent who are US citizens. And then we have US nationals, and these are natives of American Samoa or Swains Island. So that was option one. Then defining option two, which is an eligible non-citizen. So someone might be an eligible non-citizen if they can provide documentation that you see bulleted here. So maybe they have a green card because they're a permanent resident, or they have an arrival departure record if they're a refugee, asylee, or parolee. They might have a T visa or maybe a parent with a T1 visa. So this is for victims of trafficking. They might have battered immigrant status, so victims of abuse. Like we mentioned, they might have citizenship in one of these places, meaning they don't have a social security number, but they might be eligible for some kinds of federal aid. And then they might also have status under the Jay Treaty. So this will apply to certain Canadian born Native Americans. So these are our eligible non-citizens. And as you can see in the screenshot here, if the student selects the second option to indicate that they are an eligible non-citizen, they will be prompted to enter their 8 or 9-digit alien registration number. But we also have option number three, and that is an ineligible non-citizen. So a student who is not a US citizen, US national, or eligible non-citizen won't be eligible for federal student aid. So that's going to include students who've been granted DACA, students who are an F1 or F2 student visa, or if they have a J1 or J2 exchange visitor visa, or if they're part of a G series visa, which pertains to international organizations. So these students are not going to be eligible for federal aid. Now, like we've already mentioned, if a student has DACA and also if they're undocumented, so they don't have any protected status, they're not eligible for federal aid. However, some DACA recipients will have a social security number, so they might be able to complete the FAFSA just as a way of determining their eligibility for state or institutional aid. And so if a DACA recipient has a social security number, it's best to start by asking their college or university how that student should apply for financial aid. And if the institution says they should complete a FAFSA, then we definitely recommend that they proceed forward with that advice from the college. But again, I would always encourage folks who are working with students who have DACA to actually reach out to the college and see which process is recommended or preferred. So for these students, because they're not going to be eligible for federal aid and they might not need to complete a FAFSA, if they cannot or should not complete the FAFSA, then high school educators in Alabama can give this student a FAFSA waiver so that they're able to fulfill their high school graduation task. So those are available and they're available in several languages. So if you're working with a student, again, who cannot complete a FAFSA, then it's definitely appropriate to give them a waiver in this case. So that was all about the student. So when we're thinking about federal aid eligibility, we're mostly concerned with the student and their citizenship status. But we want to address questions that we receive about parents and how parents might impact aid eligibility. So for students who are dependent students for the purposes of the FAFSA, they will be required to provide parent information on their application. And so, does a parent's citizenship status impact the student's aid eligibility? And the answer to that is no. A parent's citizenship status will not impact a student's actual aid eligibility, but it might impact how the actual FAFSA is submitted and completed. So it might impact some of the steps that the student has to complete. And it might also impact some follow-up after FAFSA submission. So in this case, say you have a student who is a US citizen and their parents are not, we strongly recommend that those students complete the FAFSA with an advocate who can kind of guide them through the process, since there might be some really complicated aspects of it. So Alabama Possible is here to support you in that, as well as great organizations like HICA. So on the actual FAFSA application, it is not going to ever ask for the citizenship status of the parent, but it does ask for the parent's social security number. So if a parent does not have a social security number, they should enter all zeros on the FAFSA. And the parent should never enter an individual taxpayer identification number or an ITIN in place of a social security number. So parents might have what's called an ITIN, and that is just a number that is issued by the IRS so that the parent can comply with federal tax law. So it's used for parents to be able to submit and process their federal income tax returns when they aren't actually eligible for a social security number. So lots of parents might have this ITIN, and it's not a replacement for a social security number. It's just the way that they're able to file their taxes. So on the FAFSA, we never want to use the ITIN in place of the social security number. We want to enter in all zeros. And if you're working with a parent who you might either know is undocumented or maybe suspect is undocumented, it is kind of important to understand if this person actually has a social security number. For instance, you might be working with a parent and you might see their taxes and see that there is a number at the top and just assume it's a social security number. Well, if it's actually an I-10, that's important to know in advance because you're not going to want to use the I-10 on the FAFSA. So we'll talk a little bit more about how to have conversations with families so that they feel comfortable and they feel safe. But it is really important to understand whether or not the parent has a social security number so that we're filling out the application appropriately. So unfortunately for these parents who don't have a social security number, they're not going to be able to create an FSA ID. So they're not going to be able to sign the FAFSA electronically. But this does not prevent them from actually submitting their FAFSA. So instead of signing electronically, they're just going to print out the signature page, sign, date, and then mail that into the address indicated. So that will be the step for folks or for parents without a social security number. Now, other ways that a parent's citizenship status could affect how the FAFSA is completed. So the student might have to complete some follow-up tasks if they're selected for verification. So as a reminder, verification is a completely normal process. It's just where a college or university might ask for additional paperwork that the student needs to provide to verify some of the information on their application. And so commonly what verification might look like is providing a tax transcript. So if the student has parents who are undocumented and who cannot provide a tax transcript, there might just be some further complications in how the student actually navigates this process. So again, we always recommend that you seek guidance from other organizations who can really support the student in this process, and know that a parent's citizenship status, again, won't impact the student's aid eligibility, but just might impact the way that a student navigates the process of completing the FAFSA. So we're going to go over a few FAFSA scenarios to really lock this in. So scenario number 1 is for Elizabeth. And Elizabeth was born in the US and has a social security number. Elizabeth is considered a dependent student for the purposes of the FAFSA, so we'll have to provide parent info. And then Elizabeth's parents do not have social security numbers. Only Elizabeth's father works, and her parents did file taxes. So how do we assist Elizabeth? So first we'll ask, is Elizabeth eligible for Title IV aid? And the answer is yes. And then when we're thinking about completing a FAFSA to determine aid eligibility, who should create an FSA ID? So Elizabeth should use her social security number to create one. Her parents who do not have social security numbers will not be able to create FSA IDs. And then on the FAFSA, when the parents are filling out the parent demographic information, they're going to put all zeros for their social security number field. If the parents use an I-10 in that social security number field, it will be rejected. So again, we never instruct families to use the I-10 in replacement of the social security number. And so it's important to have that conversation with parents about whether or not they do have a social security number. So in terms of actually signing and submitting the FAFSA, the parents are going to need to print, sign, and mail the signature page. And when they do this, they want to make sure that the student submits the FAFSA after they've printed the signature page and mailed it off so that everything can get processed. And this can take sometimes weeks to get processed because federal student aid will have to receive the signature page and then begin all of the processing. So that's our first scenario. Our second scenario involves Jalen. So Jalen and his family came to the US when he was 2. He currently has DACA, but his parents do not have a protected status. So Jalen is considered a dependent student for the purposes of the FAFSA. He has a DACA issued social security number, but his parents do not have social security numbers. And both of his parents work, but they do not have enough income to have a tax filing requirement. So they do have income, but it doesn't meet the threshold for filing federal income taxes. So how can we best assist Jalen? So is Jalen eligible for Title IV aid? No, DACA recipients are not eligible for federal student aid. However, we did know that Jalen has a DACA issued social security number. So should he file a FAFSA? And the answer to that is possibly. We again recommend that students ask their college or university what is the appropriate next step, because there might be other financial aid applications that they complete in replacement of the FAFSA. So if Jalen isn't eligible for federal aid, what kinds of aid is he eligible to receive? So primarily private scholarships on national, state, and institutional levels will be the aid that Jalen is recommended to seek. And especially for state level, it will depend on what state Jalen lives in. So just assuming for the purposes of Alabama, likely not going to be eligible for state aid. So we'll be seeking scholarships from private organizations. Some scholarships will ask for proof of citizenship or FAFSA completion. So in this case, it might behoove Jalen to complete a FAFSA with his social security number, just so that he can submit that FAFSA as a record of financial need to a scholarship organization. So what we recommend is to ask the college if Jalen should complete a FAFSA or if there's some alternative he should do instead. That way they can calculate his EFC and determine his aid eligibility. And then, of course, that FAFSA can also be useful for determining aid eligibility for scholarships and other types of aid. And if Jalen ends up completing a FAFSA, parents will indicate that they don't file taxes because it said that they didn't, but they'll still be asked questions about their financial situation. So they will answer questions about their income. But remember, their income didn't get them over the threshold to need to file federal taxes. So of course, you'll want to get Jalen connected with resources and organizations who can help the family and then stay up to date with state and federal policy, because Jalen is a DACA recipient. And like Michaela mentioned, DACA is kind of going through a big flux right now. So we want to make sure we're staying on top of that. Our final scenario is Manuel. So Manuel and his mother have been granted asylum on Form I-94. And they have received their social security numbers, but they're still waiting to receive their alien registration numbers. So for the purpose of the FAFSA, Manuel is considered a dependent student, and both he and his mother work. So how can we best assist Manuel? So he is eligible for Title IV aid and will use his social security number to complete the FAFSA. When answering the question about citizenship, he'll select the second option. I'm an eligible non-citizen, and that's because asylum seekers are eligible. And so he doesn't have an A number yet. So when he responds to the question about citizenship and indicates option 2, it will prompt him to enter an A number. This is kind of an interesting situation where he doesn't have one, so he can skip that field, but he'll likely need to follow up with the colleges where he's applying, because they will want to see proof that he is an eligible non-citizen. But then since Manuel is a dependent and they're going to have to provide parent information, in the parent demographics section, The mother will need to provide the social security number. In the rare instance that the mother doesn't have one, then she can put all zeros for the social security number. So in terms of reporting tax information, because they just came to the US to seek asylum, when it asks about 2021 taxes, it will depend on where they've filed their taxes. So whether it was in the US or in their country of origin. And if it was in their country of origin, then they'll need to convert how much the parent made to US dollars. So those are a few scenarios that we wanted to throw out. We know there are all kinds of scenarios that come up. One that we hear kind of commonly, I think, is for students who are US citizens, but have parents who are undocumented. And this can play out so many different ways that I don't really want to get into the weeds of it. But just know that often when you have parents who are undocumented, their income situation or their tax situation can be the trickiest to navigate. So I'll throw out a few examples. Say the undocumented parents are working, they're earning income, and they actually are earning enough income to be required to file federal income taxes. Say they're not filing federal income taxes. That could pose a problem to the student because it could show, hey, my parents have income, but they're not filing income taxes, and the college might ask more questions about that. Or on the other side of it, they might be earning enough income to have a tax filing requirement, and they are filing taxes with their I-10. In that case, either way, you're going to be answering questions about the parent's income. It just depends whether you're answering, yes, my parents filed taxes, or no, my parents didn't. And that might prompt the college or university to ask more questions. Because sometimes if a parent earns enough income to have a tax filing requirement, the university is going to want to see that those taxes have been filed. So it just might create more follow-up tasks, but we're always happy to answer questions around that. So let's say that a student is not eligible for federal aid. What are the other aid options? So if they're not eligible for federal aid, scholarships are likely the best option. And colleges and universities might be offering institutional aid in the form of scholarships. So you'll want to check with the actual aid office. Then there are also organizational or private scholarships that are available, and there are several local organizations that we recommend looking into. So these places that are listed on the screen will likely have scholarship opportunities that are opening up in 2023. So we'll send out the slides with these links so that you can go directly to those pages and look them over. Now, outside of local opportunities, there's also a lot of different websites and organizations that have databases or curated lists of scholarships. So we recommend that students just look through those and see what applies to them. We have JLV College Counseling. On CapX, there's actually a filter on the left-hand side where you can look for opportunities that do not require proof of citizenship. And then we also have Immigrants Rising, so lots of scholarship opportunities for undocumented and documented students. And then Get Schooled also puts together a list of opportunities for these students. So I'm now going to turn it back over to Michaela to talk about strategies and tools that educators and community-based organizations can use.
Right. Thank you, May. So a couple of resources that we have are here on the slide, and one is a blog post that was created last year through Alabama Possible. And it is resources in Spanish about the FAFSA, federal aid eligibility, resources on scholarships. So that is definitely very useful. There's also a one-pager that is specifically for undocumented families and just the ins and outs of going to college. And then lastly, we have a toolkit on how to support undocumented students. And this is really for y'all to just kind of read and to kind of see like what can you do as an educator to support them, outside of doing a FAFSA or, things like that. And so we're going to talk about a couple of tips for talking to families. And so, this can definitely be really tricky, especially if you might have like an inkling that, maybe immigration status might be a barrier for a student or family. And so just always be mindful. Not everyone is comfortable talking about their citizenship status. Don't ask directly, but let the student and parent bring it up if they are willing to do so. Again, going back to just building the trusting relationship is so important. And then we have make your conversations more universal and inclusive. And so, of course, when you are doing the FAFSA, that's like when you really get to know students, and that's just because it's so much personal information. And so I would recommend, just kind of keeping things more general until you build that rapport with the student. If you're working maybe with a group of students on the FAFSA, try to be inclusive. And so one example we have here is you need to create an FSA ID for the student and one parent. Unless the parent does not have a social security number, then they'll need to print, sign, and mail the signature at the end. So just kind of keeping things general. Another thing that in terms of language, but something that my team, we've been really thinking about this past year is we've had a lot of students who are unaccompanied minors. And so they may be living with someone who is maybe not their parent, might not even be their direct family. And so we try to use language like guardians, kind of keeping it so that we're just being really cognizant of these kind of nuances. So then, of course, educate yourself. So open your doors and increase their comfort by knowing the policies and understanding how to use them. So again, I hope that our presentation early on kind of lets you in on some of the policies that affect students. Build trust by building relationships. So be aware of what situations these families may be in. So again, we're just going to keep harping on building the relationship and getting to know your families. So next, we have verbalize your commitment to confidentiality and discretion. So, students understand from a very young age that if they are in the situation that they are undocumented or they have family members that are undocumented, they have grown up knowing that they kind of need to keep that information to themselves. And so when they come into the situation where they have to share some of this, it is really important that you keep this information confidential to yourself, only using it when necessary. And, I love that we have the symbolism here of butterflies, and the monarch butterfly has been a symbol of dreamers for several years. And just having a butterfly in your office or outside your door really just shows that like you are here for them and you are you have their interests at heart, right? So of course, we want to encourage building partnerships. You can partner with nonprofits, community-based organizations like myself, or like HICA, and like Alabama Possible, and there are several others throughout the state. And building partnership with trusted leaders in your community. And so one of the things that I have really come to see is that there are a lot of past graduates from your high school who have gone through this and would love to help with completing FAFSAs. I mean, we have a lot of volunteers who contact us who contact us and say, like, I want to give back. I went through this and I would love to help students with XYZ. I would really encourage you to utilize those people. I myself, I am not an immigrant, and so I don't have that experience. But allowing someone who does can be really powerful for a student. And then lastly, we have here a short video. It's about 2 minutes, but it's about microaggressions. And I really encourage you all to take some time after this to watch it, because, I think sometimes students who are experiencing these microaggressions, it can weigh very heavily on them. And so making sure that we are not contributing to that as much as possible is really important. Under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, schools are supposed to provide information to families, parents, in the language that they're most comfortable with. And I will share with y'all, we did do at HICA an event about a month ago for a free college application week where we invited families to meet with recruiters, but we provided volunteer interpreters, and families were so happy. They were so happy to be able to participate in the experience with their student, and it was really, really powerful. And so finding opportunities for those families to be able to get the information, to feel part of the process, because we all know that students need support. And this is definitely one way that the education system can support that. And then the two more things is just, I know there's a huge push right now in the state for workforce and internships, and there are a lot of really great opportunities out there for internships. I have seen that some students are unable to do these internship opportunities because they might get paid, and if they are undocumented, they wouldn't be able to actually get paid. And so please, if you are ever in the situation, give us a call and we can help you advocate, because there are ways around this. And we don't want a student to miss out on a really, really important opportunity. And then lastly, again, as May mentioned, DACA has been, the past 5 years, just kind of up in the air. And we still don't know really what's going to happen. And so I just ask that you keep up to date with these federal policies, because if DACA were to be eliminated, we would have a lot of students who just wouldn't have a path. And that not only has huge implications on our economy, but also on them, right, and their families. So if you have any questions, please reach out to us at HICA. I'm going to drop my information in the chat. We can help with tax information, immigration questions, and then, of course, anything around education. So that's it.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing all of these details. And I know everyone on this call is really trying to be an advocate for their students. So thanks for highlighting some ways that they can continue to do that and develop that. So we don't have any questions in the chat so far. So I'm just going to go ahead and get to our poll questions. But if you do have any questions, feel free to contact us or drop those in the chat right now. So I'm going to go ahead and go to our next slide so that you can see the PowerSchool information. We'll also put this in the follow-up email, but you'll enter in both the course and the section number to register in PowerSchool. And you have about a 2-day window to make sure you get that done, and then your PD will be processed. We have a few upcoming events. So one is tomorrow. It's our second round of FAFSA office hours, both for high school educators and representatives from community-based organizations. So this is just a come and go, drop-in style meeting. Bring any FAFSA questions you have. It can be specific to a certain student or just general questions, and you can come as is convenient for you from 10:30 to 11:30 a.m. And then we hope y'all have a wonderful winter break. And then we're excited to support you in the new year. We'll start off the new year with our Alabama Goes to College campaign refresher. So, really, the goal of this is just to highlight resources and tools while also previewing the second half of the academic year and what is to come. So, we'll make sure we include registration for that in our upcoming newsletters. And we definitely hope y'all will join us. Students and educators can always feel free to give us a text or a call at 334-316-6155. That's our help desk. We'll answer all kinds of questions from college planning to financial aid. So definitely feel free to reach out. And we put some information about this in today's newsletter. So hopefully you saw that. And of course, we would love if you stay connected so you can peruse our website or you can email us at algoestocollege@alabamapossible.org. So definitely feel free to see us as a resource. And if there's anything we can't answer, we'll always get you connected to the right place. Thank you so much for your time today. And again, we hope you have a wonderful winter break and get some rest so that we can all support our students next year. Thanks.